Patrick Henningsen and TNT.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. All right, welcome to the broadcast. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. We are streaming out live globally at TNTRadio.live, also on the various streams. Thank you guys. If you're watching us on X, we're also streaming off at 21 Wire on X as well. Great to see you guys there. We have a powerful broadcast lined up for you once again today. We'll be bringing our guests onto the stage in just a few moments. Our first guest, we're going to be connecting from the Middle East. I'm looking forward to that conversation. Now let's welcome onto the stage our next guest. Dr. Frank Romano is joining us, I believe, still from the Middle East in Istanbul, Turkey, and appreciate you joining us, Frank, and there's a lot of ground to cover. First of all, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Patrick. Glad to be back.
Appreciate you joining us. And there's been some, I think, significant developments internationally. Slowly, a lot of pieces are moving to kind of surround Israel and isolate it legally and internationally. I realize, and a lot of people are frustrated, I'm sure you get this as well, Frank, that the wheels of justice are extremely slow and they grind incredibly slow. However, they are moving, and this will net some results down the road. We're starting to see things and countries coming on board. I want to first just get your take on the current situation with the ICC filing the International Criminal Court, but also, more importantly, progress on the ICJ side as well. There's a number of other countries. There's people breaking off diplomatic relations with Israel. There's more talk of sanctions. Go ahead, Frank. What are you hearing?
You're absolutely correct, Patrick. It's been very slow going. For an example, after I was released from jail in Jerusalem, I submitted my full complaint as a French-American lawyer before the ICC for war crimes against Netanyahu and others. And that was in 2021. I submitted that complaint and asking for arrest warrants. And it was only May 20th of this year, just a few days ago, you could say, where the ICC submitted an application. The prosecutor submitted an application to the ICC court for arrest warrants. You're absolutely right. It's very, very slow, painfully slow, and too slow, way too slow, including the ICJ, which we'll get to later, because it would be very important if these courts move forward, and if they move forward before and condemned Israel for genocide, and the ICJ for genocide, and the ICC submitting arrest warrants earlier, it might have convinced other allied countries to Israel to start refraining to give arms and money to Israel, because they might be hauled in before the ICC as accomplices.
Yeah, and that's really what we're looking for, is those types of results, because only through sanctions and through embargo, especially of anything regarding defense, can we really and truly get what the result that people want. The result everybody wants, I'm sure, well, most everybody. People want to see a ceasefire, they want to see a reduction in hostilities, and they want to see a stop in the killing in Gaza. So those are things that could net a positive result in that department.
Yes. The only way to enforce a decision by the ICC is that the states agree in good faith to support it. In other words, through boycott and through refraining of sending arms and money. And the United States, they have special interests, in particular France and Germany as well, that are supplying Israel with a constant amount of arms and money, is that they're afraid of being hauled in as accomplices if there is a decision. Now, the decision by the prosecutor, which is, revolutionary. We've been trying to get the prosecutor for years to do this, to submit the application to the ICC judges for arrest warrants, is huge, because it's the really only leverage that the court has. Why? Well, because this court, the ICC, cannot rule in absentia. It has a rule, not like the U.S. criminal courts, that the defendants have to be present in The Hague in trial to be condemned. And unless they, under the arrest warrant, if Netanyahu, once he receives it, leaves Israel, and the international police seize him and take him to The Hague for trial, unless that happens, these defendants like Gallant and like Gantz and Lieberman and Trump and Obama as accomplices stay in their countries. They don't leave. The arrest warrants will not be applied because they cannot be seized and taken to the Hague, arrested, taken to the Hague. But it's still leverage because the rest of their lives, there's no statute of limitations. These arrest warrants will stick with these defendants for the rest of their lives. They really have to be careful if they travel. So that's the real leverage. And of course, other countries in compliance with an ICC decision just to submit arrest warrants, even without trial, can boycott even more. It will inspire other countries to get on board with the boycott, even to get on board with the ICJ court decision, which is linked, because they see now, since the prosecutor is so hesitant to act, there must be solid evidence of war crimes committed, including genocide, for the ICC to have made a move and then jump on it. And then we can talk a little bit about the ICJ and how it can enforce its decisions.
And this is the point, Frank, because normally when the discussion of the ICC comes up, certainly in the United States, the West, it's like, well, the U.S. is not a signatory to the Rome Statute, neither is Israel, neither is China, Russia, etc. What good can it do? It's pretty much a toothless exercise, but that's not really the final point. The final point is that it provides a sort of backdrop that opens up, maybe encourages other countries to take direct action. We're talking about boycott, divestment, and sanctions, whereby they could justify. There's a lot of pressure from the international Zionist lobby and the U.S. on this, but they can justify in saying, "Hey, we are acting." Looking at the decisions from these international courts and bodies or these arrest warrants, there's legitimacy to our boycott, divestment, or sanctions activity here. So it does, I think, it opens the door for the possibility of more countries and governments, institutions, organizations to basically initiate BDS actions on this. Your thoughts?
Good. Absolutely, and just an indication of that, we see Chile and Turkey and other countries that are joining the complaint with South Africa. That's just an indication that other countries that were hesitant to be involved in any case with the ICJ, or even to have sent a complaint to the ICC against individuals, are now getting the courage and the support to move forward. But let me just also, we were in the middle of talking about the fact the United States is not a member of the ICC, and nor is Israel, but ICC has jurisdiction over any member state activities that come from countries that are not members. In other words, Israel that is committing war crimes on Palestinian territory land, it is still subject to jurisdiction, even though it's not a member of the court itself. So what the United States says it has no jurisdiction, that's all propaganda and empty statements that are not based upon law at all. The ICC has jurisdiction over them when it comes to their activities in the land of a member state, such as Palestine, that has been declared a member state. So yes, overall, we're going to see more boycott action, and we might even see action coming even from the main suppliers of arms to Israel, such as the United States and Germany and France, because now they're going to be asking themselves, well, am I going to be added to the complaint? Well, Biden will be. I'm going to update my complaint that was submitted in 2021 for war crimes against Netanyahu, against Lieberman, against Gantz, Obama, and Trump as accomplices. I'm going to now add Biden as an accomplice, and we see exactly as an accomplice to these war crimes.
Yeah, there's Anthony Blinken, others certainly deserve to be on that list as well. And is really important what you just mentioned there. It is kind of a game changer that Palestine is now more widely recognized as a state, and also at the UN General Assembly level. And this means that Palestinians now, they can apply to join South Africa's ICJ case against Israel. And apparently, according to reports, if this request is granted by the World Court, an ad hoc Palestinian judge could join the panel deliberating genocide claims. That would be quite an extraordinary thing in itself. I'm sure the Israelis will not be happy about that development if it comes to fruition. Your thoughts, Frank?
Absolutely, and it's ironic that the decision of the ICJ, the initial decision for conditions the initial decision that made before it ordered Israel out of Rafah, was that it said it was plausibly committing genocide and it must open the gates for humanitarian aid. Two of those decisions were agreed by the Israeli appointee to the ICJ, and just to give an idea of the type of propaganda and policies the Israelis use that tend to dupe the world, they said, well, that decision must have been anti-Semitic, even if one of its own judges ruled in a couple of those decisions that the ICJ made. And so I suppose its own emissary to the court is anti-Semitic. In any case, but really, this is the world is finally waking up to this, the attempts, amateurish now it sounds like, but very clever before, of Israel to smokescreen all these decisions and put it into the basket of anti-Semitism and anti-Jew and so forth. And now the world is waking up to the reality that these actions by Israel that are coming to the fore in mass in Gaza, because it's happening so intensely, people are waking up to it, that need to realize that since 1948, Israel has engaged in ethnic cleansing, genocidal behavior since 48, and now finally the world is waking up to it. And unfortunately, they're waking up because of this major disaster catastrophe in Gaza.
No, it is. It's unfortunate. It's sad that it's come to this, but there has to be a way forward. There's got to be some accountability, some international justice on this. In fact, many will argue, Frank, that how this legal effort goes at the ICJ and ICC level will really determine the survival of these two institutions, the legitimacy of these institutions, the utility of these institutions going forward, that this will be the ultimate litmus test. Your thoughts?
Yes, and they've already lost a lot of credibility because the Karim Khan, the new prosecutor, about 2 months into this 8-month war, visited Rafah, and we talked quickly about it and just made some general statements that, he was sorry about the humanitarian disaster, not addressing his own responsibilities, and then visits families of the hostages that have already sent complaints to the ICC against Hamas, but didn't visit the Palestinian families, who also have claims for war crimes, obviously, as a group in Gaza and in the West Bank. It's lost a great deal of credibility, and even to this day, it's not off the hook in the world's focus on the fact that it could have, the ICC and the ICJ could have made much more concrete decisions far early on to add a lot more pressure early on, and could have avoided, with the international pressure and pressure on the United States, some of these awful massacres that are taking place today and the starvation and so forth. The ICJ, its initial decision was it's plausible that Israel is committing a genocide, and then it said you must open up the gates to humanitarian aid, and you have 1 month for accountability. Whereas South Africa said we need accountability after 2 days because it was assured that Israel would not comply with the decision and needs to come clean immediately so it can be condemned for genocide. And we saw what happened. And finally, the ICJ, months later, with another complaint from the South Africa, which we see Chile and Turkey and other countries are on board now, finally made a decision to order Israel out, at least of Gaza, of Rafah, and opening up the gates. But we see already that Israel has complied with neither of those conditions of the recent ICJ decision.
Yes, indeed. So we have Benjamin Netanyahu, we have Yoav Gallant, the defense minister there, and these are the sort of two main high-profile individuals, the face of Israel's genocide, as is being currently litigated in the International Courts of Justice as well. So you have these very high-profile characters. And at the same time, Benjamin Netanyahu is planning to visit the United States and addressing Congress directly. While all this is going on in the international courts, I mean, the optics of this, Frank, it doesn't look very. It's almost like Washington's thumbing its nose at these international institutions. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the United States is a signatory to the Genocide Convention. If I'm not mistaken,
it
there
is.
Is this
You're right.
is this a bad political move if this indeed happens? Because it looks like they're gagging to have Netanyahu address Congress once again. What do you think?
It is terrible, very terrible for the world, and especially the United States, its credibility, because on the one hand, it is asked, it is requested that Israel does not attack Rafah, and we see it's even today there were 40 people killed, and now Israel is attacking refugee camps, even places that were supposedly earmarked as safe zones, and then the humanitarian aid hasn't happened. And why? Well, Israel said it's not our fault. We're ready to do it, but Egypt doesn't want to do it. I think it's collusion. Israel and Egypt have a deal. Israel said, just don't agree with it because you want us out, and we're not going to leave the Rafah area. So don't open the gates on that basis. I don't believe at all of the story that the reason why they're not opening the Rafah gate for humanitarian aid is because of Egypt. I think it's in a collusion agreement. So this is getting back to what you were saying. Bring in Israel to the United States is almost like awarding Israel for flaunting its nose, for thumbing its nose at the United States. Just to finish off on that, I just saw an interview by Kirby, the security director in the United States, saying that yes, Netanyahu proposed a ceasefire agreement to make things worse. Not only did Israel snub its nose at the U.S. request not to attack Rafah and to open up the gates, which hasn't happened for humanitarian aid. It is not it's finding loopholes in its own ceasefire agreement that it issued. And Kirby then said, well, no problem, we will help enforce this decision because we will influence Israel. And yet the irony behind it is the United States has had almost no effect on Israel whatsoever when it's asked it, for instance, not to attack Rafah, to open up the humanitarian gates, to comply with the decisions, at least implying it should comply with international law. And so now we see, in spite of all that, welcoming Israel back in the United States is really a slap in the face. And the United States will lose even more prestige and credibility that it is at odds with Israel. At least it leads us to believe it is, but in reality, it's awarding Israel by bringing Netanyahu back to Congress, which Netanyahu now, there was a date set, and now he denies that he is going to come on that date. So we got all this duplicity going on. And I can talk, if you want, about the flotilla as well. The analogy, and we'll get into the flotilla now, the analogy behind the court decisions now where other countries are jumping on the bandwagon a bit on the complaint and helping South Africa in its complaint against Israel for genocide and also supporting the ICC decision. It's the same idea with the flotilla. We want to get into Gaza. We've been waiting now over a month with 5,500 tons of food and medicine. One cargo ship was able to go already, but it only went to a port in Egypt. It did not go into Gaza, and it's just waiting in line at the Rafah gate now with the thousands of other trucks. So the analogy is, if we can get in, or at least we get in, we'll be arrested. We expect to be arrested, but the goods normally after inspection will get into Gaza very quickly. Other boats will, maybe hundreds of boats, will decide to do the same thing. And you see, if we once get in, but what happened is we've been stopped. Israel, through its international machinations, has stopped our flotilla, and here we are waiting with all this, as you put it, Patrick, necessary food and medicine and water for suffering and starving Gazans is just sitting here in port, waiting to go to Gaza.
And the reports that we've been seeing, Frank, quite disturbing, in fact, of Israeli settlers blocking roads, putting large boulders in the middle of roads, holding up aid trucks, ransacking the aid trucks, destroying the food, destroying the baby formula, just basically throwing it all out into the fields, on the street, just, mutilating all the packages and so forth. So that seems to be encouraged by the Israeli government. There's been no statements or pushback on this at all that I could see. No condemnation from the U.S. State Department. I mean, really bad optics for Israel there. And then Israel itself has been inspecting and emptying early on some of these aid trucks. Maybe you can speak to this. And some of the people delivering it have been either forced to turn back, haven't been able to pass through. So Israel has the final say, don't they, in what actually goes through the corridor there, even after it passes the Rafah gate. And that's been the case really since the beginning. Can you confirm that?
I confirm it, Patrick, and I'll take one step beyond and saying that the settlers are doing this, and not only has the Israeli government not really done much, the soldiers let them do it. But this is all part and parcel of this attempt to genocide, and it's to kind of take a step back on what is going on with these Israeli people. Israeli Jewish mentality is humanitarian-oriented, family-oriented, but the answer to this, and we've done a serious study, these settlers have gone through very, very clever, serious brainwashing, as well as the soldiers. The soldiers able to go into a building like what we saw in the press a month or so ago, and a man was holding his hands up in surrender, who is deaf and dumb, and kill that man and boast about it. You know that they've really been brainwashed into believing the Palestinians are really not human, and they're all terrorists. Even the babies are potential terrorists, so let's kill the babies type of brainwashing. But now to get to the corridor where the aid is supposed to go through Rafah Gate and through Kerem Shalom Gate, not only have the inspections been very slow and the goods have been confiscated, we see there are many examples, Patrick, in the news that have been confirmed that the Israeli soldiers actually shot at those Palestinians taking the goods off the trucks, simply taking goods off the truck, and then try to cover up by saying, well, they were stampeding us, and no, there was no reports confirming that.
Yeah, that's just another level of horror there. The fact that Palestinians who are starving, beleaguered, being killed and bombed when they go to retrieve the aid from the trucks. Some of this has been caught on camera, being taken out by IDF snipers. I mean, the level of the sadistic nature of this is incredible. And what I think is even more shocking, Frank, is that this supposedly scenes like this don't have the humanitarian cachet to warrant being on the front pages of major Western mainstream media outlets. Should be running on the chyrons on CNN, on all the major networks and so forth. So that to me is one of the most shocking aspects of this. We're going to let Frank go because I think he has to move on there live from Istanbul, Turkey. Again, we really appreciate him joining us so late over there. I think it's just past, I believe, approaching midnight right now in Istanbul. So, a great, brilliant effort as well by our guest to be available for this really important discussion. And Dr. Frank Romano, of course, intimately involved in the legal proceedings there and filing against Israel for war crimes, understands the ICC very well, and is engaged and involved with that institution over this issue for quite some time. And then something else that he mentioned, which deserves a little more attention, is that Chile, South American country, Chile has joined the developing nation group of countries rallying behind the genocide case against Israel at the ICJ, the International Courts of Justice. This has just been confirmed a couple of days ago, and this is exactly what we're talking about. Once South Africa pushed the door open, there's a bunch of other countries, smaller countries, that would more easily come through that door without fear of being isolated or ostracized or diplomatically pressured by the U.S., because the United States, for all its power and influence, can't attack everybody that's going to defend the Palestinian people in the midst of an ongoing genocide. So that's a really important point. The president of Chile, Gabriel Boric, said in a speech to lawmakers this weekend that he's appalled by the humanitarian devastation in Gaza, especially the slaughtering of women and children. And he condemns Israel and the IDF's indiscriminate and disproportionate use of force. And he says, I quote, these acts demand a firm and permanent response of the international community. That's quite telling, a permanent response. This means that Israel's permanently in the dock in the international community. I don't think that people in Tel Aviv or in Washington or London for that matter, well, London will probably come to their senses probably before, because they have to be somewhat normalized with how most Europeans are thinking on this. But the penny hasn't quite dropped in Washington and Tel Aviv and London and Berlin on this. But the rest of the world, or what they call the global South, or what the mainstream media are calling the developing world, they see it quite clearly. And while these might not be, strong and powerful countries as individual countries, when you take them as a bloc, South America, for instance, led by Brazil, a leading BRICS nation, a major first world economy now, Brazil. You take Brazil in conjunction with Chile and the other South American states, that is significant. Not only that, but Israel is also an import-dependent country. It absolutely depends on exports from other countries entering into Israel for just about everything you can possibly imagine, including its tech sector, its much vaunted tech sector. The only thing probably that Israel it does have domestic security on possibly is food security, but even that is being strained at the moment. Why? Because Israel did something which is a little bit of an own goal early on. They canceled the licenses and travel papers for Palestinian migrant workers working in the various sectors at the sort of low wage level, agriculture, of course, being one of those. So on the agricultural side, distribution side, all the various gears that make up the not very big Israeli economy in terms of physical size, but big in terms of relative GDP, they're having labor issues now because they won't allow Palestinians into Israel proper. So that's interesting how this is developing. So all of this is going to contribute to cumulative pressure on Israel, and it's allowing countries like Chile, and there'll be others to follow, basically to pile in here with South Africa on this filing, on this international case. So this is going to get interesting, of course, through the summer. And there's, it's kind of a diplomatic nightmare for the United States because the U.S. is having to negotiate with all of these countries. There's the new trade deals that are due to be inked in the next 12 months regarding North and South America as well. Updates on international and bilateral and multilateral institutions agreements on trade and commerce and so forth. They have a lot of negotiation to do with countries like Chile, Brazil, Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, Argentina. So all these countries might have varying views on the Palestinian issue. So as you can see, this is becoming a priority internationally. And it's very interesting, just like South Africa and apartheid South Africa became an international priority eventually, to the point where it couldn't be ignored or sidestepped. And that's when you started seeing real change happen in South Africa. And that's when the apartheid regime was cornered at that point. And they were basically holding up the country economically and in terms of participating in the global political economy. You could see some of the same things happening, probably a lot quicker, in fact, with Israel, because at the end of the day, it's a very small country. It is very dependent on international imports as well. And it also needs cooperation from countries all over the world to help it on so many different levels, not least of all diplomatic relations, visas, travel, and so forth, trade and commerce. So the problems for Israel are just going to mount. And you know what? This could have been diffused a long time ago. This could have been diffused back in October or November, but there was an agenda afoot, and they really believed, those in Washington, London, and Brussels, Berlin, Paris, they really believed what Israel was telling them, which was, this will be over in a couple of weeks. We're going to crush Hamas, and we'll end this terrorist threat to Israel. Just back us in this, give us whatever we want militarily, and we'll have it done with. And don't worry about it. This is our business. We know how to handle it best. Leave us alone. Give us the weapons we want. Give us the satellite and targeting support, the drone support we want. Give us the cash, and we'll take care of the rest. That's what they told the Western countries back in October. Right now, checking my calendar, we're in June right now, and things have just gotten progressively worse for Israel, and they're only going to get worse going forward. There is no positive ray of sunshine on the horizon, only dark clouds for Israel politically, economically, and probably the most devastating part, militarily. Militarily, right now, Israel's probably at its weakest point in its history, and it's just decided to do the unthinkable, which is open up another front to the conflict. We're talking about South Lebanon and the northern Israeli occupied Palestinian territories as well. Those settlements, they've all emptied out. Intense fighting has broken out again this past weekend. Large parts of territory in Israel are currently on fire. They do not have the civil defense or the capabilities to put out these fires. They're running into problems administratively. And military-wise, their bases are being targeted. Some of them have been completely destroyed by Hezbollah. Those are Israeli bases in northern Israel or occupied Palestinian territory, totally flattened and destroyed. That's a problem. And so now we're getting into another chapter in this. We'll cover all this and more as it develops. In the meantime, top of the hour news headlines coming up. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. Stay with us. We got a whole lot more in hour number 2. See you in a few.